So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending which time zone you're in as we sort of continue our journey all at Charleston from wherever we're joining from. We're really honored to have so many people select to join us today for this session on can we collectively act? And unlike the headlines, we're going to answer yes. It's a study that's been done to say that usually when the headlines ask a question, the answer is no. So we're going counter. If I could get some indication that you're able to hear me, because I'm getting some messages. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I have a few messages that people weren't hearing me, but I think they've figured it out now. Okay, so can we collectively act? Yes, indeed we can, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy and that there aren't things to consider. So it's my pleasure here today to introduce this session. My name is Lisa Janicki Hinchliffe. I'm the coordinator for information literacy services and instruction, as well as a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm joined today by three valued colleagues and friends, I'll say, to address various aspects of this topic. I want to do a little bit of reflection as we start this off, which is to say that there's some real important key words in the conference abstract for this session, which was written pre-pandemic. So we really were not thinking exactly in the same way that I think we now are today. But I particularly appreciated Dr. Lewis's entry comments this morning in the keynote about what it means to be a community of grace and the idea of really interrogating the values that we have and then not just sort of putting them up on a wall or issuing them on a website as a press release or a framework, but really doing the hard work in our organizations to make our values operationalized, to live them so that we are a grace-filled community that's really attentive to doing the work that it takes to be the kind of community that we want to be. Now, I think he probably was thinking in a much more lofty way than perhaps just looking at the way we contract for open access publishing and business services. But I still think there's a lesson there that's very relevant to our session here today, which is that we have key in this concept that we're talking about today, the notion of community-driven or community-enabled. Community goals. So as I was thinking about this, I had to really think about what does it mean for us to be a community? And how big does a community have to be? It has to be at least some size. But how big can it be? Is there a maximum size? And there's things for us to think about of how do people enter into a community? How do they find their place within it? How do they act within it? And so it's going to be a great opportunity for us to think about this today from the perspective of pursuing our goals for open access publishing, for equity in the publishing space, in the space of being able to share ideas, being able to hear ideas, being able to disseminate ideas. We can think as well, though, that a community is not necessarily homogeneous. Most of our communities are quite heterogeneous. They're diverse. They have different aspects. So how could we incentivize, if you will, community building or collective action, but through a variety of different models? And that's what we have today on the panel is different strategies that different organizations and associations are taking in order to achieve this kind of community action, collective impact, and the like. This, of course, conversation takes place in context of a larger conversation and transformation that is happening in scholarly communication, publishing, higher education, research institutes, and the like. So our framework here today is partnerships for financial stability. What does it look like for us to work as a collective, heterogeneous, diverse community across different sectors in pursuing the kind of financial sustainability, which is, of course, also the sustainability for information exchange, knowledge growth, and the like. So I have asked each of our speakers from on the panel today to begin by introducing themselves and then addressing the question of how is your organization defining collective and community-driven in the context of the work that you're doing here today? And we're going to start with Stacey.
Okay, hello everyone. Nope, the wrong one. All right. So as Lisa was saying, I'm Stacey Burke. I'm from the American Physiological Society. I'm the Director of Publications and Marketing and Sales. And I am going to talk today about our model, which is the Read, Publish, and Join, which is our transformative model. And I think what Lisa had talked about, which is, this quick little image I found, which is, coming together is the beginning of it. So when we all started talking about this, but then keeping together is really progress, and then working together is the true success. So I'm going to just talk about all the pieces that it took internally to get this moving. So what is the Read, Publish, and Join? To answer the question, we can if we collectively act and collaborate to serve the APS community, right? So our goal as a society, as a nonprofit, are our members, and our members are part of this entire ecosystem with publishing. So the timeline for this was, we created the pilot and we consider it for about an entire year. And then we finally launched it in 2020, but it takes so much moving parts to actually agree for a society to make this type of move. We've been really reliant on the publishing revenue that we receive to operate our society. And frankly, we weren't really looking for any changes. But as the world moves, we know we have to move into OA. So we partnered with one partner, and it was very small, which was very lucky for me, Iowa State, to kind of launch this and get everything internally moving. So when we first started, we had to implement it, and it was entirely manual, which was manageable with one institution that's very small. 10 months later, we learned, we progressed, and we actually have some automation. And we can do it at scale. And we launched a larger partnership with JISC, which is based in the UK, as many of you all know, and Helen will talk more about that later. And we're just looking for more partnerships, really partnerships outside and internally. So internally, what does that mean? I mean, really make friends with your IT department because they're not going to really love you because you need to make all these different changes. And the problem with the society is that it operates completely different than a publishing entity. So to explain all the moving pieces, it can be really a publishing 101 discussion. Also, all of our internal systems are dedicated to the membership society, right? We use these systems to accommodate our publishing, paywall and everything, that's associated with publishing, but really it was designed for a different purpose. The data doesn't match, the systems don't talk. And also each transformative agreement is completely different than the one before. So that's all fun. So IT came back to me and they gave me this, which just as a brief demo of what it takes to really get these things moving. I'm not going to go through each piece. And now we have to connect to external systems. So we have to be able to tell the authors, we have to verify their institution, we have to set up deal variations, we have to create a billing process, we have to report out to our librarian community as well as any partnerships, funding communities. So we have a submission system. We really need to get the note of a transformative agreement in the beginning process. Luckily, they had a module that they had created for a previous client that, again, just to show you how fast things are moving. They had nothing a year ago, and now they have something. We also implemented Grid both on the eJournal Press side as well as our journal production system, because these, it's not official. It's not official at submission, but the author should know it's official at publication. So all those things need to connect. Grid is basically an institutional identifier if nobody has heard of it. So then I have to go, back to my tech friend and say, oh, and also, can you implement this grid in our system internally? And he's like, there's no use for it. So I have to build that use case and demonstrate how it is actually helpful for memberships. Then we have to connect with all shareholders, this is what we do on a daily basis, just so everyone knows. And I'm not going to go through this, but we've watched Scholarly Kitchen. We're grateful for Lisa's update on what transformative agreements really mean. Lisa did an OA presentation and webinar for our society, and really the disconnect between authors and what we're doing in the OA space is very real. So connecting to all stakeholders from one system. One of the things that I've embarked on, and I know that everybody on the panel as well has been involved in, is OASPA has created a steering committee and advisory group to create the OA switchboard, which is a central information exchange hub. And that's between all parties. I'm putting this contact on the on the side, just so if anybody has any questions from the librarian community and would like to participate, I encourage you to all check out the website, because it does show all the integral players. It includes funders, it includes multiple publishers. It's an upfront assessment if and how the OA publication meets your institutional requirements. It's an automatic data feed. It links invoices to the publication data, which, as I had said before, internally that we had done. And it does standardized reporting, which is really helpful for a small society to know that we can rely that we're reporting as well as everybody else is doing that. And from a librarian standpoint, it really monitors your funds. So everybody knows that all the transformative agreements are different. If you have a cap, you can put it in. If it's only a certain number of articles per agreement. And again, for a librarian, it's really hard to track it across publishers and put your own systems in. So this is something that they're trying to solve in this relationship, and again, across multiple publishers. And so Lisa's original question is, what is this all for? It's for it's for my community that I support, which is APS. So it's our top priority. And that's the unique piece of this that we added on, which is the join part. It was designed to give, obviously, for a frictionless open access publishing process, but really to give our members a platform for their work and to comply with local funding requirements, which we were not doing. And we were seeing a decline in our author submissions from the UK market specifically, and Europe. But we talk about equity in the publishing space. We need to make sure that these agreements are in place, because we have early career researchers that are second thought when it comes to budgets internally. Some people don't have adequate funding. Some people will have funding from their grant, and then it runs out when the time comes to get more data published. So what this does is actually, it's representing all those people by we're also giving one additional join membership for each corresponding author. And the reason for that is because we're trying to grow our community. We want to represent more. And we also, it's really on us to prove that this value is good for their professional development and to continue beyond publishing what we can do. Again, what's this all for? It's an additional great benefit for the researchers. It's our membership in a community. We're a home for top researchers and educators. We're a champion for inquiry and discovery, and this will help. And we're a launch pad for future groundbreakers. So, we really are hoping to get in the community and continue that in publishing. Okay.
Thanks, Stacey. I really appreciate the innovation that I see here with the read, publish, and join. The join part is that particular component that really brings us to the notion of community-driven or community serving, or so many different things we can put community in front of. So I've given Sarah just a few seconds here to let her get her slides up and running. So Sarah, tell us about what PLOS is thinking about when it comes to this notion of community and building a community-driven model.
Awesome, thank you. You guys hear me okay? See my screen okay? Great. Hi everyone, nice to see so many familiar names and faces in the session. I'm Sarah. I'm the director of, what am I director of? Strategic Partnerships. Sorry, I've been live tweeting and doing this, as you all know, so trying to remember who I am. At PLOS, I've been there about 1.5 years, and my focus has been new business models, new revenue opportunities as an open access publisher within the constructs of PLOS values and commitments. So the next slide is going to advance. Oh, I knew this would do that to me. All right, I'm going to actually jump ahead so we have some time for all of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the models that we're currently looking at. Let me see if this magically works. Boom. All right, so there's a number of contexts in which PLOS is thinking about libraries. I'm going to sort of lay that out and then quickly kind of go through so we can get into our definitions around communities. So historically, PLOS has had a very transactional relationship with communities, and we would not have considered libraries a community. And that's the first model you see there. The bundled APCs are very similar in terms of a kind of transactional relationship. It's our new models around flat fees and community action publishing, our collective action model, which begin to tap into broader definitions of what community is and what engaging with those communities looks like. And this is kind of how the journals are distributed amongst the models. So quickly, well, what do we mean by diversity? Helen did a really nice job of outlining this a couple weeks ago in Chronicle of Higher Ed. So Helen, I'm gonna steal a little bit of your thunder here. She highlighted the concern that many libraries have around how open access budgets are being spent, and just a general question of whether open access funds should be proportionally spent on subscription journals, and the fact that most of them are right now. And she just raised the question that libraries really want to ask: what is the commitment to different kinds of publishers, and how do we want to be supporting them? And I mean, certainly a conversation Helen and Jisk and I have had around their prioritizing of working with PLOS was really a commitment that, you know, 3 to 5 years down the line, we want to see native OA publishers like PLOS still be around. And to do that, libraries have to make some hard choices in terms of how they prioritize. In terms of equity, the issues around access to publishing funds, which Stacey highlighted, remain kind of the primary problem PLOS is trying to solve when it comes to business models. We've had a lot of success with APCs. We've seen incredible growth with APCs, whilst recognizing, particularly lately, that we are supporting a new barrier, another barrier that stops folks who need to engage with research from engaging in the way they want, which in this case is publishing. So that's why we feel it's incumbent upon us to be thinking of and contributing to that next generation of models that's more inclusive. Additionally, equity has definitions within the context of how we partner with libraries. And I very consciously use the word partner and partnerships, as Lisa had flagged, rather than customers, because every single one of our engagements has been predicated on this set of shared principles with our partners. And you know, we're not selling vacuum cleaners to folks. It's a process that we have to do together. So sharing risk, being really transparent about data, and being transparent with the larger community about how the models are structured is really important. Community has a number of different definitions. Historically within PLOS, particularly when it was purely focused on APCs, we've always meant our authors, our editors, the target folks working in the various fields that PLOS journals reflect. We've expanded that. Obviously, we need to be thinking about stakeholders writ large. For a long time, PLOS was quite insular in terms of, you know, how it looked at its contribution. We're part of a much broader ecosystem, and that's been critical to thinking through how we evaluate business models and open access. The last year and a half for me has really been getting PLOS internally to recognize we have a new community that's really important to engage with, which is research institutions and their libraries specifically, but also thinking about what it means to be aligned in terms of mission. So, you know, equity focused organizations like JISC have prioritized engaging with us because of that mission alignment, and that's been really valuable. And then right now, in the current political moment, the current social justice moment, the current economic and pandemic moment, it's quite a paradigm shift we're all going through. We are currently really assessing what are to Lisa's point, what are the structures that we are continuing to perpetuate that are further marginalizing communities that we really want engaged with the research that we produce, particularly anything obviously related to COVID, given that communities of color are so marginalized and impacted disproportionately with everything that's going on right now. The imperative to do the kind of reflecting Lisa's commented on is critical. And you might have seen our CEO, Allison Muddit's most recent post in Scholarly Kitchen. You know, at the highest levels of the organization, we're grappling with what constitutes enough when it comes to doing this work. And then I'll round out with our definitions of inclusion, shouting out to Elaine Westbrooks here at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Inclusion means anybody who needs to access or engage with research objects can and should have access in whatever means they need, whether that's to publish it, to read it, to mine it, to just access data, whatever it is, it should be there, and there should not be structural barriers to impinging upon that. Helen underscores that in her piece in Times Higher Ed, and I always have to give a shout out to Jeff at Duke University. He started a call with me a couple weeks ago just saying, Sarah, open access is social justice. And my head sort of blew off my body because it seems so obvious, but I hadn't framed it that way. And I think Jeff really powerfully connected the two, and those certainly align with how PLOS is thinking about this work. So building an actual community and thinking through how to create a collective action model is quite a conversation unto itself. I'm going to stop here, and hopefully our discussion will get into that. And my slides are already uploaded into Pathable. So if you want to jump ahead to some of this content when we get to the chat, you'll find it in Pathable now. And with that, I'll stop.
Great, Sarah. Thank you very much. One of the things I think we have had here too in this first session, two speakers here while Helen gets her slides up, both Stacey and Sarah are talking about moving from necessarily an APC that goes directly to the author and the author manages it, to moving to a model, a business model that contracts with libraries and does this at an institutional level. So read, publish, and join, that lets the library facilitate individual authors publish OA, but then that author gets a membership. Sarah's community action model being, for these particular journals that have, a different approach and wanting to really make sure those journals have that financial sustainability through partnerships with libraries as well. So, the theme here is kind of models that move, and as Sarah's last slide said, from retail to wholesale, in the sense of moving from the individual author to the institution. And what that, of course, does is put us as institutional people into the model of then having to negotiate for these agreements. And I'm really pleased that we have Helen here today from JISC, because JISC has really been one of the leading organizations in thinking about how do we collectively act, if you will, on the library side of the equation. So Helen, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. So hello, everybody, from Manchester, England, where it's now late afternoon. It's dark outside for me here. I'm actually going to talk about our priorities for acting collectively. So what guides us in our discussions with our national consortia. I'm a licensing and engagement manager, and what that means is that I'm part of the team that carries out negotiations with publishers, but I also have a role liaising with our members, trying to find out what their barriers are, perhaps, what their problems are in terms of trying to engage with these kind of agreements. So I wear two different hats in my role, and that probably is why I'm here today. So in case you don't know about us, I'm going to talk a little bit about JISC first. And I'm going to just try and move my slides on. One sec. There we go. So JISC works on behalf of universities, colleges, and other research organisations in the UK. And working collectively can be tricky because we're a very large consortium. As you can see, I've put some figures here. Our membership includes 168 higher education institutions. And these are a mixture of research-intensive organisations and teaching-focused institutions. Of course, our members are the core of our community, but there are also other stakeholders who have who are important in terms of how we act collectively. And I've listed some sector bodies here and some kind of senior leader type roles. And they're represented on our strategic groups. And so they have a voice, if you like, in the decisions we make. As a community, our objectives and approach are informed also by, of course, open access policies of the largest UK research funders, by Plan S, and by our commitment to global initiatives such as OA 2020. So what this means in practice is that each year our strategic groups agree and endorse the requirements that we set for our open access negotiations for the year ahead. We have an overarching objective, and that's supporting the transition to full and immediate open access. But these requirements provide the framework for our conversations with publishers and for the evaluation templates we provide to libraries, through which we try to incentivize their action. And here I'm going to show you what those are. So we have 5 requirements for transitional agreements, and I've tried to embolden the fourth one that says agreements must be transparent, because that's really critical to any kind of community-based model. We're really asking publishers to make their costs, progress and details of their transition to open access openly available to help institutions make decisions about where they want to invest future budgets. I should also mention perhaps that we're seeking agreements with all publishers of UK research, so that all our members researchers have funder compliant open access options available, but also because JISC supports a diverse publishing ecosystem. And what this means for us, as has been said by Stacey and Sarah, is that lots of conversations with publishers that haven't worked with a consortium before. So we have to work very closely with them to find the best model that will appeal to our community, but also works for the publisher. We encourage and support innovation in open access models, and we amplify the voices of the publishers that are doing what we might call the right thing to support the transition to open access. Of course, you've just heard from two of them, but I'd also like to mention three others that have gone down quite well with our community. So ACM's open model is notable for transparency on publishing costs. We had a lot of positive feedback on the clarity of the transition of ACM's journal portfolio to fully open access from our members, but affordability was the issue for research intensive institutions. And worth mentioning that facilitating feedback to publishers on the acceptability of proposals is a key part of our negotiations. And while, of course, a single global model might be the ideal, currently we really need models that can flex to accommodate the needs of different communities. Of course, we support annual reviews subscribed to open model. Pricing is fair, it meets our transparency requirement. Again, it's been well received by the UK, and supporting this kind of model can be a way of demonstrating that social responsibility values that universities often include in mission statements. So we've used this model to develop agreements with a few society publishers, but on its own, Subscribe to Open isn't enough for UK researchers, and so we've had to incorporate a green open access element as well, so that they can comply with funder policies. In terms of Emerald, well, they've supported the transition to open access through their fairly liberal green open access policy they've had since 2017, which allowed immediate open access for accepted manuscripts. But we have to do more work with Emerald now to develop this further so that it complies with funder requirements on reuse rights and on CC BY licensing. And just to comment on the progress that we've made so far, as a community, I've included figures here. So we've negotiated 23 transitional agreements with large, small and society publishers, plus those agreements based on Subscribe to Open and Green Open Access, and also agreements with open access publishers, both commercial and not-for-profit. And in total, these agreements mean that 43% of UK research can be published as open access if our members sign up to them and if their authors select open access. The response has been positive, and as you can see, we've got 96% of members who've signed up to at least one agreement. We're already negotiating with the 11 publishers I've mentioned who cover 81% of UK outputs. We're either negotiating or we have agreements with them already. And we've got to obviously scale up conversations now with that long tail of publishers, and that needs to be efficient and sustainable for everyone. And we're considering how we can do that for 2021. And just finally, one of the key points we wanted to make really was, although we're working on agreements now, we really want to encourage our members to look ahead really and think about the future. This really is a time of experimentation and evaluation, and through the discussions that we're engaging in now, we're effectively designing the open access agreements our community will find acceptable for the future. So they need to be affordable, sustainable and transparent. Through this experimentation period, we're also monitoring our agreements, and we're currently recruiting to what we're calling our Transitional Agreements Oversight Group, which will monitor the impact of agreements and publishers' longer-term plans for open access. So we're really helping our community see what's possible by acting collectively, and we hope that this is a catalyst for change. Thanks, Lisa.
Well, thank you, Helen. I think these were really interesting for us to think about when publishers are organizing for collective and community engagement, and then how on the library side, we might also be attempting to do this. So I put into the chat, but I want to say it out loud as well, because I know not everyone is watching the chat, that we would really welcome questions from participants in this session. With 167 of us, I think I'm going to ask you to put them in the chat, and I will organize them into, rather than trying to get mics turned on and off and the like. So you can either put them into the chat here or onto the Pathable website. So it seems like as we get that going, I want to pick up actually something on that Stacey said. And Stacey, could you say a little bit more about this? I think, did you mention that it's called the OA switchboard, and sort of what that infrastructure need is in order for some of these agreements to start to work?
And I will do my best as a representative of something that I'm just a participant in. That's why I provided the link. But it's really a message center, right? So it'll make sure that the institutions get a message. It can also match up to say, okay, dear librarian, this, you can approve an author. So if an author has part of a deal, you can put all of your deals in there and say, okay. And then the author, you can say, okay, this author's been, wants to submit this article. Do you approve that they're part of your institution? It also allows you to match up with the funder to say, does this comply with, this particular funder, and it also gives people like me, the publisher, an ability to put my deals in the system and get communication back. It's not a billing service, but it does match up to your billing services. So right now, and I know that Sarah is as well, we're going to be a launching customer, and I still have to connect a lot of our systems, right, to make sure that works. But I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. So one of the things I really appreciate as we've had some of these conversations preparation is just come to appreciate the sheer sort of below the surface infrastructure that's needed in order to make these OA business models and workflows really be robust enough so that it's not literally that Lisa walks a piece of paper across the room to Stacey, right? Like at some points it starts to almost feel like that. So one of the things that I see in the chat here, so Alicia Wise raises this question, and maybe Helen, I could even ask you to think about this one in particular. What can be done to standardize or simplify? I mean, I'm thinking of Alicia's own article where she said there's 27 business models that can push us towards open access, and obviously complexity may be needed, but at the same time, simplicity allows us to constrain costs. So Helen, how is just thinking about this, given the scale you already have?
Yeah, I think one of the key points for us is that we're usually trying to get agreements that are uncapped. So, there's no limit to the amount of publishing that's associated with the agreements. And what that's trying to do, and this is a conversation that Sarah and I have had, is it takes away the administrative burden for institutions. It doesn't require authors to do anything tricky in the author system. They're either eligible or they aren't. There's no sort of step that an institution needs to take. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to get. But of course, Alicia, you'll understand that the affordability is the sticking point.
Okay, yeah, very good.
And I will say something about the standardization too. I mean, I wish that they could just be, this is the model and everybody just take it. Really, everything is really, it's particular to that institution. And, I think Sarah had talked about it too, is that, the diversity needs to remain. And I think, getting into these agreements with, I'll be honest, a smaller society like me is really progressing that publishing choice. So we at least have to kind of keep that as an option. So it's like, everybody goes to the larger publishers because that makes sense because they can get it all in one shot. But
just to flag another way of thinking about the question, Alicia, because the agreements are never going to be standardized in the way I think we'd all like. So I think a critical component that Jennifer Goodrich raised in the Zoom chat is we really need, ideally, the infrastructure to be as centralized and consistent as possible, such that PLOS is not building 50 different connectors to 50 different library repositories, right? We can feed everything in through OA switchboard, which we're also participating in, and that can disseminate. Similarly, tools like RightsLink and any of the other billing tools, like ideally they all talk to each other such that if you're using one and not the other, it doesn't mean all this custom work needs to be done, particularly for smaller organizations like APS and PLOS. So if the agreements can't be the same, ideally the infrastructure supporting them can be as centralized and consistent as possible.
So Helen, I see there's another comment in there, and I think librarians involved in consortia would be really interested in this. There's a question that observes that JISC is a heterogeneous collective, right? Some more teaching institutions, some more research, and certainly that's true of every academic library consortium my institution is part of in the United States. Footnote, not the Association of Research Libraries. But let's leave that one aside. The rest of them are very heterogeneous in this sort of way, right? Teaching institutions, two-year schools, private institutions, public. How are you managing that heterogeneity, and how do the members of your community sort of give space and grace to each other for their arguably sometimes not shared priorities?
I think the important point for us is that we're giving all our members the opportunity to engage with the agreement. So there's not usually a requirement for all our members with, you know, with their different focuses to engage, but everyone has the opportunity. And so what we find with our teaching focused institutions, and I'm not sure if this translates, is that they often have research aspirations, you know, not necessarily in the library, but at an organizational level. And so this, you know, having publishing available to their researchers is seen as a bit of a bonus. And I've got an example where an institution who hasn't really signed up to any agreements has recently found money for Sarah's agreement because they wanted to provide, you know, this kind of opportunity where they wouldn't normally have it. And the money hasn't come from the library, it's come from another part of the university. So I guess it's just about raising awareness of what's possible as much as anything. Our focus, you know, to be honest, our focus is very often on the research intensives because that's where the money is for you know, the way that funding is in the UK for open access. It comes from the research funders and it goes straight to the research intensives. And so what we're trying to do is just balance that out and give a voice to the other institutions. I think the question in the box mentioned, is it generally understood that open access is a good thing? And I think this is the right moment to be emphasizing that, partly because a lot of institutions in the UK are trying to develop open research statements, and that's happening pretty much across the board. So now feels like the right time to be offering these things. You know, it's all kind of coming together quite neatly. But one thing we're also trying to do, and Sarah, I don't know if you'd want to say anything about this, we want to be able to produce usage statistics for open access publishers, you know, for content by open access publishers, to be able to evidence to the teaching focused institutions, you know, where the value might be. So in terms of signing up to agreements, I think they struggle to make business cases for contributions because they don't have that money necessarily. So with some evidence about usage, we think that might make it easier. And Sarah's involved in some work on that.
Sarah, I'd actually love to talk a little bit about the kinds of, you know, the kinds of new expectations you're feeling as you move to this wholesale model. I know we've talked about before, you know, librarians like their data. So as you ask libraries to sign up to this, what's the new data that PLOS is, you know, you don't have to list like the whole spreadsheet, but
I can give you I'm more than happy to share the challenges of making the sausage. I mean, so usage stats are something many folks ask for. And of course, when you explain to them that for open access content, it doesn't make a ton of sense. It's interesting to hear how folks can kind of just go into autopilot and they're like, well, give it to me anyway. And you kind of have to explain, well, it won't be remotely representative of your usage, but here. We personally, this is something a lot of institutions didn't realize, you know, we had not tracked counter compliant data. So we've spent a ton of money to do that. And we are going to do that, but that comes at a cost. And, you know, institutions tend to just take that data for granted. Another big one that just really pushed us on was funder data. who is funding the articles, and not just who is funding them. Let's add a twist. Who is the author who paid? Who's funding her? So if Lisa's lead, Stacey, Helen, and I are co-authors, and we know that amongst us we had Wellcome, NIH, and Gates. Did Gates pay the fee? And that just gets into a level of, this is where the partnership piece really was helpful, where it could just like level with Helen and 2,000 spreadsheets and be like, this is where I think we got, I hope it's close enough. And that commitment to transparency and trust allowed Helen to know, like, I believe you, that's the best that you can give. And so the optimizing of systems around that is going to be really important. We're going to work with Helen on a better funding report that we can provide. On the counter side, the reality is that the majority of the counter reports don't make any sense for natively open content. So Counter, to their credit, has a working group on natively OA content that focuses on native open access and green, so repository usage. And then we're also partnered with LibLinks on a whole new set of reports that are trying to demonstrate the reach of natively OA content in a way that I can turn back to JISC, or I can turn back to Iowa and say, look, the value of your deal is represented by some of this data. You should renew it, right? Because that's fundamentally what it's going to come down to. So much more to say there, but lots to do.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, Sarah, have you talked about citation data? Has that been, that's I don't know if that's even on the radar screen of most librarians, like how often they're getting cited compared to non-OA.
It hasn't come up for us to provide it, because I think librarians are such experts on how to get it and where they would get it from. They're really looking to us for the stuff they don't have access to already. And so much of it is under the hood, who's paying, what's the money, explaining that a lot of this stuff has been, fees have been waived, so demonstrating that kind of thing has been a challenge.
Yeah, and Lisa, I think about the OA webinar that we did when we asked, first of all, I was at a presentation for a very high level scientist, and I said APC, and they were like, I'm sorry, what's an APC?
Yeah.
So
that's the other half of the battle.
Yeah, exactly. So we're representing a group that doesn't even know what we're talking about. And so we have to kind of take the nomenclature a little bit down to really talk to them. But so I like that you're, getting the funding elements of it to let them know. But then you look at the funding agreements and it's like, okay, where does it say this pays for your publishing?
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't. Yeah. It's a discretionary fund. And that's, one of the other things we covered. People are like, well, I think it's this, this is where I'm paying for it.
And the other piece of the data nightmare is just, are you sure this is all our papers, right? Because with the institutional disambiguation, authors, multiple affiliations across organizations, an organization having an old name and now it's a new one. I mean, just to discredit, members have come and gone, well, you said we had 0 publications, but I'm sure that's wrong. Like, we need to pay more. And you're like, and so you go through and you look through the data again and go, yeah, we didn't account for that version of the name, so we missed it. Yeah. Or we accounted for this version and it's wrong, and we assigned you too many publications, so we need to go back and readjust to remove those. So that was a back and forth that Helen did an amazing job of facilitating, so we could be flexible when folks said that the data doesn't look quite right.
So I unfortunately have to take the responsibility of stopping this conversation.
Oh my God, are we done already? Yes. Wow. Okay.
I know. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
I was just going to say grid, Sarah.
Yeah.
Implement grid.
So the problem...
Not that easy. Not that easy.
I know. Believe me, I know.
So I think the real unfortunate part of being virtual is, of course, that if we were in person, there's an easy, we all just sort of either stay in the room and keep chatting informally, or we, go out into that hallway and, are able to continue that conversation. I'm not exactly sure if the Zoom session stays live for us for a little bit longer. I'm going to formally end us. If it does stay live, we'll stop the recording. We'll chit chat a little longer if people want to, but I'm sure there's other conference sessions to get to just as that as well. So I want to start by just thanking all of our attendees for attending, especially I apologize for all the questions that came into me privately that I could not get to. I'm actually enjoying a little bit of chatter back and forth with some of you all as well. We'll try and get some of those questions answered maybe on the Pathable website with the postings that we can make there. So I want to just give a round of applause to this great panel, Helen, Stacey, and Sarah. It's always just a pleasure to work with these folks. And Brian, thank you for being my sort of person to make sure the technology was working. It went great. So with that,
and thank you, Lisa, for great moderation.
Yes, Lisa.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.